What is critical thinking?
My idea of critical thinking is looking at a problem or a situation and looking at both sides of the coin and coming up with the best solution for the problem.
The best solution of the problem can never really be found because according to the elements of thought, thought is a never-ending circle, so you can never find the single best solution. This checklist for reasoning does say, though, that you are trying to solve some problem that is set in front of you. Anne said that you are trying to find the best solution. As she said that, she implied that you look at the problem from multiple viewpoints and not favor only one particular angle, which is what the universal intellectual standards say.
Critical thinking is the process by which you reason past the simple definition into the complex ideas of the problem.
According to the Miniature Guide of Critical Thinking is a process because you must follow multiple steps to analyze the situation properly. Jonathan has a lot of the main ideas of critical thinking, but he is not specific with what complex ideas of the problem that he is trying to get to. Jonathan used the essential intellectual trait, confidence in reason, when he said that you would have to reason past simple definitions because to do that, each person must come up with their own thought process, and that is critical thinking.
Critical thinking is very important when you're trying to get your ideas across to other people and know that they understand what you're saying.
Callista approached critical thinking from the essential intellectual trait of intellectual empathy. Without this, other people would not be able to understand your process of critical thinking. If other people cannot understand where you are coming from to get an idea or solution to a problem, they will not be able to fully understand your idea or solution. However, she missed the part of critical thinking where you are looking at the subject, original idea, or problem that you get the idea from that you would share with other people.
Critical thinking is when you have a deep mental conversation with yourself to figure out a problem.
When you are thinking critically, you are trying to figure out a problem, but the problem can never be fully solved because the elements of thought say that thought and solving a problem is a never-ending circle. The elements of thought, however, use the universal intellectual standards, which includes depth. So Luke's mention of a deep mental conversation with yourself is true to critical thinking because the more depth that a solution has, the deeper that you can think about a problem, and the clearer, more accurate, precise, and relevant the solution will be.
Critical thinking is examining your own point of view from someone else's point of view or some other opinion's point of view.
Point of view, according to the checklist for reasoning, is essential to critical thinking. You must be able to look at the issue or idea of a problem from all angles to make a judgment. Rob did not, however, mention that you must look at each person's point of view to see both the strengths and weaknesses, and that you must not be biased in evaluating the point of view. You must use the essential intellectual trait of fair-mindedness.
Critical thinking is the process of gathering information and analyzing it to determine what you believe about a certain topic.
Patrick is correct in the fact that critical thinking is analyzing the information that you have gathered or a problem that you are trying to solve. Determining what you believe, however, is intellectual unfairness. This implies that an individual will not look at both strengths and weaknesses from each point of view with the same eye. They will be biased towards what they believe instead of being fair-minded.
Critical thinking, to me, is a thought process that's used when you're making important decisions.
Arlen is correct in the fact that you use critical thinking when you are making important decisions. If the decision is important, you must be fair-minded and look at each side of the issue to determine what the best decision is. The template for problem solving says that you want to be able to change what the best decision is if the situation demands that change. And as the thought process is a circle, according to the elements of thought, the correct solution to your important decision will be forever changing. As Emma is only a 14-year-old freshman in high school, she does not quite understand the process of critical thinking with her motion. She defined thinking very well because most people would associate this with thinking, but she is too young, however, to apply the critical part into the definition. Each time she mentions her visit to our class, she talks about how the information went over her head. So she has intellectual narrow-mindedness, not because she chooses to have narrow-mindedness, but because she hasn't developed the skill of intellectual empathy yet, which is essential to critical thinking.
Critical thinking is cerebral, using your brain to make decisions and to process information and to weigh two different sides of an issue, and it's looking at all parts of the picture and being able to do that in an investigative way.
You can tell that Mary graduated from a science program because she used Cerebral and that critical thinking uses your brain. You could not think critically without your brain because that is where you make decisions and process information. You must understand the concepts of what you want to make a decision with because you can only make inferences and interpretations to draw conclusions on information that you understand. According to the checklist for reasoning, Mary is correct that you must weigh two different sides of an issue because you must look at both the strengths and weaknesses according to the point of view from a checklist for reasoning. Looking at all parts of the picture shows that there is more than one issue that you have to look at strengths and weaknesses for. You have to look at them for all points of view. By saying that you must critically think in an investigative way, Mary is saying that to correctly think critically, you must use the highest order thinking and be explicitly reflective.
According to higher education, nearly all cited definitions of critical thinking emphasize in-depth consideration and examination of gathered information using different modes of thinking, in light of the present evidence, in order to create beliefs, make decisions, or take actions. Higher education is correct in the fact that critical thinking involves in-depth consideration and examination because one of the universal intellectual standards is depth. You have to be able to understand the deepest complexities of a problem in order to be able to think critically about the issue. Information that you are critically thinking about does not have to be gathered. You can critically think about anything, but saying that it has to be gathered information implies that you cannot. You must critically think through a problem in order to create beliefs, make decisions, or take actions. In order to do this, you must have intellectual empathy, one of the essential intellectual traits. According to teaching sociology, critical thinking is thinking about your thinking while you're thinking in order to make your thinking better. To put it briefly, it is self-improvement in thinking through standards that assess thinking. To think well is to impose discipline and restraint on our thinking by means of intellectual standards in order to raise our thinking to a level of perfection or quality that is not natural or likely in undisciplined, spontaneous thought. In order to understand teaching sociology's definition of critical thinking, you must be able to think critically. They are implying that you must use the essential intellectual trait of intellectual autonomy, as it states that you must learn to think for yourself with control over your own thought process. This means that you are conscious and aware of your critical thinking and are working to become a better and more critical thinker. Teaching sociology refers to the universal intellectual standards in the Miniature Guide to Critical Thinking and says that you must use them to be able to control our thinking in order to achieve critical thinking, because they cannot be achieved without a conscious effort. We need to have intellectual courage and be true to our own thinking. My definition of critical thinking is the process of analyzing and evaluating a problem, where you identify both strengths and weaknesses for each point of view in a fair-minded way, and use those points in order to decide what the best conclusion to draw based on the inferences and interpretations that you have made would be.